Are you an avid reader and a lover of Taylor Swift? Today I would love to introduce you to our Swiftie book club. I have been reading my little tushy off, let's just say. I also got a new cat. Are you gonna let everyone come see you? Come on. Oh, okay, you're gonna lie there, okay. And he's so cute. It's been busy in this house. But today, what we are going to be doing is essentially talking about the books, the literature that has inspired Taylor Swift's writing. Taylor Swift is really well known for her story writing. I think that is especially evident on The Tortured Poets Department. It was really highlighted with that being kind of the theme of that whole album. She's referenced literature all the way through her career, and I thought that for a better way to understand her work, I wanted to have kind of a deeper look at the references that she uses to tell her own stories. Today we're going to be looking at 3 of the books that inspired some of the work on 3 of her albums. I did look at a book per album, and let's just say if I waited until I had read every book from every one of these albums, we probably would be waiting for this video for another 6 months probably. I'm not the fastest reader, but also that would be 11 books. So we are going to be looking at 1 Taylor's version, 1 stolen version, and 1 just already owned by Taylor. We're going to be looking at Red, Reputation, and Folklore today. Yippee! And if you guys like this, let me know. Leave a like, leave a comment, and we'll chat more about the books that have inspired her work, hey? Because I was doing 1 book per album, there are certain albums like Tortured Poets Department and Folklore that reference a lot of different books. And because I was only doing 1 book per album, I really had to just narrow down to the one that I thought represented kind of maybe the overall story the most. These specifically are not books that I think she referenced. These are books that she has definitely referenced. Not only is it something that she's spoken about, but it is a direct reference to this book. It's not like I think it's about this. For example, Speak Now, and people think that she's referenced Gilmore Girls, which I personally agree. I think that she has referenced Gilmore Girls, but there's no evidence to actually suggest that she did do it. It's just a theory, and we've all kind of kept talking about it. You know what I mean? So these ones are definite. She's used this reference, and we're going to talk about that. Without further ado, let's get into the book that inspired Red. So for Red, I read the Iliad. Yes, the Homeric text. No, I did not read this in ancient Greek. I am not super duper epic like that story is, a super duper epic. I read the translated text by Emily Wilson. I believe it came out in 2023, and it is one of like the most highly regarded translations of this book. And the reason that I read it for Red specifically, hey, I don't know if you guys know this little song called State of Grace. I'll be completely honest with you, this video was the excuse that I had to remove the Iliad from my TBR. I've got an extremely long TBR. I want to say it's got like 250 books on it, and I really needed to move that through because I know the story. I've just not sat down and actually read it. And I've read other texts that reference it. It was just a really good excuse. So as a kind of cliff notes what the Iliad is about, essentially the Iliad is set within the Trojan War. Paris, Prince of Troy, captured a willing Helen, who is a beautiful woman King Menelaus had proclaimed was his. And so the story begins in the 9th year of this war, and we're following many of the different kind of characters of this war. So Menelaus, as already mentioned, along with his sons, and then the army that he commands to go into Troy and recapture Helen back for him. Main players, I would say, are Agamemnon, Achilles, Patroclus. There are other beautiful female characters like Briseis and Chryseis, and essentially we watch them fight. And the whole sort of war plotline is paired up with a god plotline where the gods have favored certain characters and given them certain abilities, and essentially attempted to infiltrate this war by having their own champion. So specifically, the lyrics that relate to State of Grace and the Iliad are, "These are the hands of fate, you're my Achilles' heel. This is the golden age of something good and right and real." So here she's talking about her partner is her weakness, akin to Achilles' heel. That is his weakness. He is impenetrable everywhere except his heel. In the story, Achilles' mother Thetis dipped the infant Achilles into the river Styx, holding him by his heel. Every part of Achilles became invulnerable except his heel. All of my civilization bitches know what a golden age is. It was the first age of the world. There was great peace and happiness and prosperity. So that's what those things relate to. In this romance, it's implied that they are either in the beginning stages of a wonderful romance, which would make sense because this is the beginning track of the album, and everything is still golden. Or Taylor feels that their relationship is at its strongest point, having gone through certain hardships. This time, the love is right and real, as they have played the game of love, good and right. A similar connotation is also referenced in All Too Well, which is a song that has the same muse. In the lyrics, "'Cause there we are again where I loved you so, back before you lost the one real thing you've ever known." There is a timeline here, right? State of Grace is descriptive of how love started and how it was right and real. And where it ends in All Too Well, they both lose that realness. Would I say that reading the Iliad helped me understand Red or State of Grace specifically? In some ways, yes. I would say I do think that the Achilles heel is broadly understandable. I think we all know what that phrase means, but I do like understanding kind of the additional references better, or at least I guess knowing what the origin of the reference is. That kind of helps me place myself within the narrative better. Everyone I think knows also colloquially the Golden Age. We kind of understand what that means, but maybe don't specifically know what that means. And I think that understanding that through reading Greek texts and things like that, we can come to understand that meaning better, especially with how it relates to the other motifs that Taylor uses, especially color things that she uses within Red, which is just full of color, and that she felt she was indestructible everywhere except her heart, where she felt that she was most vulnerable. So I think that kind of having that painted out is really nice. Now, what I will say is that I don't think I recommend reading the Iliad unless you are desperate to read it, you have a love of Greek literature, or you've read other Greek literature. And I mean Greek literature by the ancient authors, right? Unless you're used to that, I wouldn't recommend it, just because it is extremely challenging. The Iliad is actually like a big poem. It's an epic poem, and it's written in stanzas, and it's actually extremely difficult to read. I normally read before I go to bed. I'll read for maybe like 10-15 minutes before I go to bed, and if it's a book that I really like, I'll, be reading it on and off during the day. The Iliad, I could not read that going to bed. It was really difficult because the language is so different to what I'm used to. It's just a lot of yapping. The only part that I felt was really interesting to me was the kind of God storyline where they would be kind of moving the characters around like a chessboard kind of thing. I really liked that aspect of it. But in terms of what was happening in the war itself, I felt like it was a bit of a drag. Sorry, Homer! And that's definitely not the fault of the translator, they're working with the text. And actually, honestly, it was very beautifully written. But what I would recommend everyone read, if you like the sound of that, is Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, which is an extremely different book, but it is set in the same storyline. It's obviously got the same characters, except the main character is Patroclus. The story follows Patroclus growing up with Achilles, a story of love, essentially. Now, in the Iliad, are Achilles and Patroclus together? No. Is there any kind of references to them being in love? Not really. But I think there's a wide kind of understanding that a lot of people think that they were romantically involved. There are a lot of stories about ancient Greeks being very free with their sexuality, and I don't think it's a huge stretch of the imagination, especially in war camps. A lot of the men were getting together. I don't think it's necessarily a stretch of the imagination to believe that they could have been together at all. So I really like that book. If you don't know the story of Achilles, that you will really enjoy that book. If you do know the story of Achilles, you will more or less feel like you're reading the same story, just in nicer language, or easier to understand language, easier to consume language. And so for that reason, that's why I would recommend that book, because it is very beautifully written. Now let's move on to Reputation. For Reputation, I read The Great Gatsby. There was actually 2 albums that I could have read this book for. By the way, this cover, is it not so stunning? I got a lot of these books that I read for this from my op shop. I would recommend that you do that too. You do not need to buy new books to have a new experience with a book. I'm a very big believer in making sure that we do things sustainably, especially when we're reading. So if you can, a lot of these classics, they're in op shops. Get yourself a deal. You don't need to have one that's super beautiful and new. The Great Gatsby is referenced in a lot of different works that Taylor has talked about. It is notably on Reputation. I think it makes a lot of sense if you have seen the movie or if you have read the book. I think that you would understand where a lot of the references in Reputation come from, especially the glitz and glamour that is associated with Reputation, especially aesthetically. But I also think that you will understand it from Evermore as well. So there are a lot of times that Taylor kind of references different parts of this book because, hey, it's a classic for a reason. I had read this book before, back in my 17, 18-year-old self. Yeah, I was kind of obnoxious. I had read a lot of classics. I was a big fan of Jane Austen. I have been since I was a child, and I still am today. But from there, I looked at a lot of other classic authors. I will say all the classic authors pretty much that I have read are Western classic authors, so there's definitely a market of other voices that I need to be hearing. There's certainly modern classics that I am yet to dip my toes into, like Murakami. But in any case, I read this book before I watched the movie that came out with Leonardo DiCaprio. There's something that I don't remember if it is featured in the movie. I'm gonna have to rewatch it, and I do feel like rewatching it after reading this book again. But there's something that happens in the book that is it just gnaws at me. It's just at my leg as I read it, and that is this book is just full of rampant anti-Semitism. But I would not say that that's what Taylor has picked up on for Reputation. The lyric specifically that we're looking at for Reputation is feeling so Gatsby for that whole year from This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. Taylor had gone away for a whole year, no one saw her. That is kind of the narrative of that. But when we come back to Taylor in Reputation era, I think that the reason that she kind of latched onto the idea of The Great Gatsby is a lot of the part of Jay Getz, his story, is that he's mysterious. A lot of the people that go to his parties, they don't know where his wealth has come from. They don't know what he did prior to having these regular parties. They don't know why he's having these regular parties. And every time he has them, he doesn't take a woman away and have his way with her. He's just engaging in these parties, but he's also kind of just watching. He's like a wallflower in his own parties, and these people are just enjoying the glitz and the glamour that he is providing to them. And I think that Taylor kind of has latched onto that idea where, you know, she had a bit of a mysterious period, and then after that, she's come back angry, beautiful, bigger than ever. She is still a massive figure. She is still, you know, there's so much about her that is misunderstood or talked about in a way that doesn't align with how she really is. And I think that that is very Gatsby, and I think that rereading this story and understanding that, I really could see the connections between Taylor and Gatsby himself. And I especially found, knowing that Taylor talks about Daisy and her daughter specifically in the song Happiness, of course, with, you know, hoping someone is a beautiful fool. Daisy hopes that her daughter is a beautiful fool because if she is, she will find happiness. So I felt like this book is incredibly complicated in the way that it talks about things. It's extremely short. I found myself as I was reading it, ingesting it, and then for weeks after I was just thinking about it, there was more and more that I was digesting about it. I think in the moment I was really stuck on the fact that, yes, there's a lot of anti-Semitism in it. I hate how flippantly characters are referred to as being terrible or disgusting just because they're Jewish. I think that is just, didn't need to be there. It also didn't add to the plot at all. The only character that really made sense that it happened with was Tom Buchanan, which is Daisy's husband. And every time essentially he's yapping, he is just really racist and really awful, and he has these terrible opinions. They are not necessarily challenged by the characters, but you can tell that his opinions make everyone else uncomfortable. And I just couldn't stomach it, but I kind of understand in a sense that, like, you can have a character that's terrible, and I guess so long as they're challenged, you know that the characters and the author don't agree with it. But, you know, seeing the other anti-Semitism that is just rampant within the book, you can kind of understand that at the time, the author felt that was normal enough to include it in the story. And I don't like that. Would I recommend that you read this book? Yeah, I would. Even with all of the things that I don't like about it. Overall, I would say, I think I gave this a 3 on Goodreads. I think before I probably gave it a 5 because I just didn't know that much about anti-Semitism when I was 17 and 18. I don't think it's as well established in Australia as it is in America. There are Jewish people in Australia, but far less than in America. And so reading it now, being much more worldly, have a lot more world knowledge than I did back then. Those things really grated on me in the story. But I definitely see her relating to Gatsby as a character for Reputation. There's a lot of things about Gatsby that I think that she really relates to. And I think it was a very clever reference for her to use for Reputation. It makes complete sense. And I do think that if you want to understand Taylor better in the Reputation era, that reading that book or watching the movie is a great thing to do to better acquaint yourself with that feeling and understanding her better than just listening to her music. And the final book that I read, the book that I read for Folklore, was Peter Pan. I think that a lot of people will understand why I read Peter Pan for this. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I wanted to read it here instead of For Tortured Poets Department, even though they are linked, because this is kind of the start of where Taylor talks about the Peter Pan connection and things like that, relating to this specific muse. I find Peter Pan to be a very interesting reference, and I also think that she has kind of chosen her references really well. I never mentioned this in the beginning, but based on especially these three, every single person I would say understands Achilles, understands Gatsby, understands Peter Pan. Peter Pan, most of us grew up with it as either the childhood story or the Disney movie, I would say, is probably the most famous one. So I think that you can really understand what she's saying with her words without having such an obscure reference. Peter Pan is such a villain of a character. He is disarmingly charming. He is always moving and you're always following him, and you never stop in the book, in the movie, you never stop to think, are we doing the right thing? Does he have my best interests? You get completely wrapped up in him. Wendy, Michael, John, they all just follow him blindly. They are excited by the prospect of him, and especially Wendy. She is desperate to impress him and be loved by him because he doesn't necessarily give any allegiances to anyone, right? He acts as like the fatherly role to the Lost Boys, but he hates mothers. He hates mothers because he doesn't believe that his mother ever loved him. But then as soon as Wendy comes into the story, he wants Wendy to be a mother to the Lost Boys. So he hates mothers, but he needs Wendy to function this way. I think that especially having Taylor reference Peter Pan for Maddie Healy, especially, like, it was prophetic, honestly, especially where that story goes. I can't believe that she used this reference for Maddie Healy. It is so intelligent. I don't think at any point she knew that it was going to develop to where it did in Tortured Poets Department, in her real life, obviously. But the fact that she used it, and you know, a throwaway line, Peter losing Wendy, It's so intelligent because, you know, for what we know of their relationship from 2015, 1989 era to Folklore era 2020, they've kind of been passing ships, you know, they had interacted around each other, known people that knew each other, or, you know, collaborated with people that collaborate with each of them. So for example, Jack Antonoff, that's the whole reason that they kind of stayed together in each other's orbit, was Jack. There was always something, it's talked about a lot, but I mean, Taylor doesn't talk about it herself really. It's understood that, you know, they had been seeing each other around that time. Whether it turned into a relationship or anything, don't think anyone knows. And I personally maybe don't think that it ever did. It was just one of those things where she felt a closeness with him and it just never eventuated. Her ship moved and his ship moved and they went separate ways and they just thought nicely of each other. But because it was a fascination that never turned into anything, it's something that Taylor was able to talk about with Folklore, ponder upon and create a story around, create a narrative around of a love that never happened because she could fill in the blanks. It's like the perfect plot for Folklore in general, especially when we talk about the love triangle, where it goes in Tortured Poets Department. The fact that she used Peter Pan is just so intelligent, and playing again upon it in Tortured Poets Department. Like, I really think that she needs to be praised a lot for this because, again, it's prophetic the way that she used this reference. She didn't know that she was going to date Maddie Healy again, right? She just had been thinking about him and he was kind of the perfect muse because it never went anywhere, but she was enraptured by him, even though she was with someone else at the time of Folklore. And I think that, like Peter Pan, Taylor probably kept moving with him, kept going and never thinking about, hey, should I follow him here? I think we've all gone through relationships like this where we want it so badly and we're singularly focused that we maybe don't see all of the things that are happening as a consequence to following them, all these kinds of things. We've got rose-colored glasses on and we are just, you know, going toward that beautiful thing that we think we want. And so that is exactly what happens with Wendy in Peter Pan. It's not until like near-death experiences that Wendy says, I need to go home. We need to leave. This is not in our best interest. Wendy realizes that Peter is not going to give her what she wants. As much as she wants to play house, she's also a little girl. She doesn't need to be the mother to all of these boys. They need their mothers. And Peter needs a mother. He obviously sees the value in it, even if he says he hates mothers. He just kind of hates women in a way. It's kind of a little bit sexist, I will say. There's parts about this that just made me, and of course the racism in this is insane. I hate reading classics because there's so much racism. I just think that it was just amazing, the reference to it. I think maybe the reason why I really enjoyed Gatsby in the end was because I read Peter Pan right after it, and it kind of made me connect the unrequited love, or maybe uneventuated love, of The Great Gatsby and Peter Pan's like the daydreaming love, and I merged them together, and I feel like these two stories really gave a sense of who Taylor is in terms of how she views herself with love. And I definitely think that Red also brings that in, although, because it's an older work, there's part of it that she's developed past that point. Definitely I feel that these two stories of like her reaching out, her putting herself out there, putting herself out into the void, praying that someone will come past and love her the way that she wants to be loved. That is kind of the through line of both of those two stories. And I found that to be so profound. Her seeing herself as maybe invulnerable in a lot of ways, especially being a public figure, having herself ripped apart by people, but her love and her feelings for other people being the one vulnerability. I think that all of that together is just really powerful storytelling. I would definitely recommend reading Peter Pan if you want to understand folklore specifically. But of course, if you want to continue to understand her better, read it for Tortured Poets Department. I definitely think that it is in a way essential, but you do have to just go, there's going to be racism in it, and I just have to accept that that's a part of reading an old text by white people. So that was kind of what I found with my readings of the books that inspired Taylor Swift's work. Like I said, I really found that, I would say especially The Great Gatsby, really had a profound effect on my understanding of Reputation and really Taylor in general. I definitely think, I would even say until now, The Great Gatsby story has really related to Taylor, especially at least in the kind of character that she portrays in her writing. I definitely think that The Great Gatsby was like a perfect reference to encapsulate her. I definitely want to know if you guys all feel that way, because just the way that I interpret her work, and maybe it's because I see a lot of myself in these songs that relate to Peter Pan and The Great Gatsby. I really found that reading The Great Gatsby was very profound to me, and I definitely think that narrative of her is really highlighted by these books. She obviously isn't only someone that throws herself out there and prays that someone will love her, although we see later in the prophecy and things like that, that is kind of exactly how she talks about that. Like, that's overall, I would say, the vibe, especially of these albums. I didn't drive with the Iliad, and it does make me feel nervous for reading the Odyssey, which I have in my bookshelf. I did have a good time overall actually experiencing it, which is something that I really wanted. So yeah, if you enjoyed kind of having a little dig around in some of these works that inspired Taylor's work, please let me know. Let me know what you think of kind of the themes of each of these books. If there's anything that I didn't talk about, if there's anything that I completely misinterpreted, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you liked this, please let me know if you would like me to do the other albums. I would really like to do the rest of them. I would say Evermore I'm most excited about because I've watched the movie that is a remake of the book that she references, but I've never read the book. And so I really want to do that one. And I really want to do the one for Fearless. So guys, please like my video. Please, I really want to do the next one. So thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. It was such a blast to be able to sit down and kind of combine my loves of Taylor Swift and reading. As of the 23rd of February, I've read 11 books this year already. So if you're reading, tell me what you're reading. And if you enjoy reading and maybe would like to see what I'm reading and maybe get some sneak peeks into what we might be talking about in the next video, follow me on Goodreads. And I read a lot of stuff that maybe I don't want you to know about. So yeah, if that entices you, go and check that out. I hope that you are all well. I hope that you are all hydrated. And I hope to see you all next time. Bye!